and this is where going outside your own civilization makes you rethink. Is this necessary? Is this aggression, which is even built into Christianity, fight the good fight and onward Christian soldiers? Western monotheistic religions are pretty aggressive, Islam more than Christianity because it was born out of warfare, but they're pretty aggressive. And if you get the religious ideology and the political ideology and the history and the games and all the rest of it, but you don't get that in China. Now, people will immediately say, well, surely there were lots of battles and wars and so on in China, and I have discussed this elsewhere, but of course you get war in China, and China has, through war, maintained its boundaries and pushed into Tibet and Xinjiang and so on and so on. So the Chinese were not without weapons or without forces, but their basic philosophy is anti-war. The basic philosophy of Confucianism is absolutely against war. It doesn't, it's about harmony. It doesn't extol warriors. And the same is even truer of Buddhism, which is pacifist on the whole, though there are some variants of Buddhism which are quite warlike. Taoism isn't interested in war, it's about nature and so on and so on. So the basic philosophies of China are anti-war. And surprisingly, and here I've talked about it, but it illustrates the difference. I mean, the great treatise on war or books on war in the West are very, Clausewitz and so on, are very militaristic and get your revenge in first or defense in first. Sun Tzu, the Art of War, which is, what, 2,500 years old, is very peaceful. It said, war is a disaster. I'm writing you a book on the art of war, but I'm telling you a war is a disaster. If you have a war which involves killing people, you've failed. It's not a success. You may kill them, but that you failed. The art of war is to defeat your enemy, if you have to have an enemy, peacefully. Surround them, as in a game of Go, until there is no move they can make. So you just hem them in, and then they accept what you are suggesting. So as soon as a blow is struck, you failed. Now that, in their great treatises on war, is an indication of a civilization which is based on much more settling things through compromise, through harmony, through the middle way. Confucius is filled with the golden mean and the middle way and so on. I mean, there are elements, as you know, of Greek philosophy which are about this too, and the middle way. But the whole basis of Chinese civilization is anti-war. And surprisingly, although it's more militaristic, Japan has also got this to a certain extent. On the whole, its history has been internally pretty peaceful. It's externally from time to time been very militaristic, and the samurai go around with swords and so on, but there have been long 200 or 300 year periods without any war. Without Japan's wars against other nations are, you can count them on fingers of one hand, whereas Britain's wars against, as an island, against other nations, you need a lot of hands to count them. So you're right, it is possible. And that is one of the things we should really think about, because if we're trying to think of a world where the dreams of people like those Dickinson, when they set up the League of Nations, can be realized, we have to accept things which are not appetizing to many people, which is that you have a world government. I mean, we live in one world, and the UN was meant to be a sort of vaguely world government, but no one was prepared to commit to it. because it'll only work if it has the means to enforce its will. And that means the surrender of national sovereignty. And living in a world of nations, no one is prepared to do that. If, as part of your de-escalation of war, you said, okay, we're going to de-escalate at the rate of 10% per annum of our military budgets, half of that is going to go to solve problems like climate change and illness and water and misery around the world, 5%. 5% will go to the United Nations and will be used to build up their power and their force, their different agencies, their not just those to do with military, but UNESCO and so on. And that would make a huge boost to the UN budget. And although the peacekeepers of the UN struggle and sometimes there are disasters associated with them, if there was a really effective force, because in the end, I remember talking to Bernard Williams, the philosopher, about unilateral disarmament and CND in the old days. And he said, well, Alan, it's too late, because as long as some other power has nuclear weapons, you've got to have them. So the only way in which finally people will be prepared to give up their weaponry is if they feel that there is something above them at a much higher level which has the weaponry. And we do this at the national level. I mean, at least in Britain, not in America, we don't carry weapons around because we assume that if there is some violence or disturbance, the state, the police, the army will deal with it. So we personally don't have to be weaponized. Now, we do that at an individual level, and that is going to be the only way in which the world can deal with this at a national, international level, that each nation is prepared. I mean, basically, you've got to trust the umpire or the referee. If you assume that by giving this up to the international body that is policing the world, if you assume that the police are corrupt or that they won't be fair to you, that when they tell you, you must leave Ireland to the Irish, or you must get out of some part of a territory which you think is yours, or you must surrender Hong Kong, or whatever it is, that they're not acting in a partisan way, but they are thinking of the general good. If you accept that, as you do with the state on the whole, most people, then you could have a world governmental system. Without that, we'll just go on, because we've just basically got separate balanced powers, and you just have a balance of forces and it shifts from one to the other. So we've got to think about that. And once you diffuse that, you minimize also aggression and violence. Although people play violent computer games and they play violent games like rugby and football, on the whole, in this country, most people, most of the time, are amazingly peaceful.